So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we dive into our challenge by Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. So we'll be looking into our question, which is how can the Canadian government exercise influence and spur innovation to find solutions to public policy problems? So we'll be looking into how we identify the problem within economic and policy analysis. Then we'll be looking into the lens for analysis that drive our recommendation. And finally, we get into our specific policy recommendation. I'll hand it over to Mauricio, who'll start with the analysis of how we dive into the problem.
Thank you very much, Ana. Governments have increasingly developed policies to support innovation. Many instruments have been put in place over more than half a century in the intersection of industrial, economic, science, educational policies. And these mainly aim to mobilize knowledge and expertise to creating new products and services. For instance, funding applied research, financing technology transfer are some of the ones that we are all familiarized with. So as these policies aim to supply innovative products and services, they're labeled supply-driven policies. So while these supply-side instruments have dominated the last decade or so of evaluating these policies, sheds light over a balance of great achievements as well as limitations to attain the desired results. A main component of this critical analysis indicates that there's a need to count with the market of purchasers and users for such innovations. So we can say that the ecosystem of actors in this field will meet a barrier if there is not a demand in place. So this makes some of the policies, the supply side policies, fail in terms of completing an innovation cycle where the supply meets the appropriate demand. So this gives place to rethink the policies, incorporating the need of specific policy tools consistently with incentivizing the proper demand. This is why we say there's a clear need to innovate. So this is improving the policies, incorporating also what is called a pull model. So I'll go into some of the features of this model. As mentioned, the difficulty of the supply to meet the demand is considered a market failure. That this translates into a variety of measures that primarily create, build, grow the demand for innovations. But together with this primary feature, a secondary one, or one that it's aligned with this primary one, is addressing social needs. So addressing social needs is embedded in this breed of policies. For instance, when trying to address climate change through innovative products. So this means it's not just bringing something new, it's bringing products that translate into social well-being. So just to illustrate some of the measures, there are many that are compiled in our report. Public procurement is one of the main ones, as it aims, well, we know it aims to satisfy a government need by demanding and purchasing goods and services, as creating a new building, buying an IT system, designing a health system, public transit, et cetera, et cetera. But when these government needs are aligned with other countries' objectives to also innovate in these fields, as for instance towards sustainability, it adds objectives to the primary one of simply purchasing. So this mobilizes suppliers in an effective way, and it sends signals to the market. So procurement is not, as I was saying, is not the only tool. We can mention that creating standards, defining regulations, building awareness, education, campaigns are just some different examples of attempts to drive the demand, or in other words, as the label that's commonly used, to pull the supply instead of just pushing it. So this is a debate that is starting, it's starting to get incorporated in the international policy agenda, in the policy arena, and many multilateral bodies, especially the OECD, as the country members begin to explore different ways to increase their competitiveness through these tools. So as I was saying, it is still a policy debate that is nourished by some level of experimentation that gives place to ground this new approach. Countries are just trying to do new things in this field. And this is, well, the challenge from ISED goes in this direction, because we were specifically asked to define new pathways for innovation policy, examining what levers are available to government in order to incent innovation from a demand perspective, without utilizing, and this is probably the most challenging part, without utilizing the traditional financial support and the tools to support business that we all know. Now I'll pass the word to my colleague Mo, that will introduce you to the Canada's innovation landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. So I'll be talking about Canada's innovation performance. And then Canada's innovation performance over the past decade can be compared to other countries using two well-known indices of innovation. The term innovation can be largely thought of as the manner in which new methods of production, new products, new organizational structures, and managerial techniques are presented and used in an economy. The OECD, and I quote, defines innovation as actively requiring implementation in order to be complete. Several individual measures of innovation have been mentioned in the literature. While no individual measure is evidently preferable, most scholars prefer using indices that aggregate a number of individual measures. In our case, we use the innovation indices reported in the Global Innovation Index and the Global Competitiveness Report to evaluate Canada's performance on an international scale. Both indices provide similar insight. Canada's relative innovation performance has worsened in recent years. Since 2011, the level of innovation in Canada has been declining in comparison to the global leader Switzerland and compared to the United States, that comes in third. Canada is a leader in research. However, innovation matrices are poor and dropping relative to its peers. This is the problem we're trying to solve. The idea that we're great researchers, however, we're lagging behind in terms of innovation. Our analysis of innovation in Canada is grounded on the Conference Board of Canada, and it was evident that there are two problems in terms of Canada's landscape, which is patents and labor productivity. These two indices seem to be plaguing the Canada as a whole, and that's what we targeted in terms of patents as one. There is need to boost coordination of patent development within the country to ensure that there's no duplication of resources and there's inclusiveness and cooperation. So I'll now pass it on to Eunice, who will talk about opening innovation in Canada.
Thank you, Mo. So we have seen there's a gap in the innovation capacities among provinces and sectors in the country. We believe opening innovation policies and tools can lead to better outcomes. The truth is that traditional innovation processes are still siloed within internal organizational dynamics. Every creative process based on a siloed structure loses efficiency before reaching out its full potential. To catalyze innovation, we need to open the communication channels and collaboration mechanisms to other stakeholders. We need to switch from innovative organizations to innovation ecosystems. So knowledge inflows and outflows can accelerate the creative industry. Open innovation can be understood as a mechanism that pushes the creative process outside of the traditional supply chain, outside of universities of experts, towards regular citizens or individuals. It is essential to be clear that this proposal goes beyond the logic of users' innovation. Canada's innovation ecosystems articulates government agencies, universities, other funding institutions, creators, startups, and other private sector entities. However, we believe much more can be done when including other stakeholders in these processes. We have seen that increasing participation leads to better innovation outcomes. Let's also remember that innovation is no longer limited to technological development. When solving complex problems like climate change or a pandemic, the implementation in the social sphere creates the need for other kinds of knowledge. The social dimension of complex problems demands a new generation of innovation policies based on the logic of distributed agency. We should measure innovation policy success in terms of impact, understood as how close we are getting to find a solution. In other words, how much public value we are creating with these policy solutions. So how can innovation policies can create public value? By increasing collaboration and interactions, or said differently, opening up innovation policy tools. From an economic perspective, a digital platform can improve the allocative efficiency of supply and demand for ideas. Stakeholders can get together easier and can replicate some interactions happening in the real world, sometimes even faster. Based on our research, by aligning the ecosystem incentives, these platforms can increase collaboration, competition, and transactions. However, the critical element for public value creation, it is to promote a diverse creative process actively. We have also seen inclusiveness cannot be taken for granted. Even when creating a more open innovation ecosystem, some actors will remain isolated. In this case, the ecosystem will exacerbate the pre-existing conditions. Now I'll pass it on to my colleague Anna so we can go more in depth on this crucial element of inclusion.
Thank you, Eunice. So diversity plays an essential role in opening up innovation. Diversity can be thought of as inherent diversity, which is gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, or acquired diversity, which is the skills that you acquire and develop throughout your life. There are studies that show the importance of more diversity in the scientific community to reduce bias and provide different ways of looking at the world. And innovation, like science, becomes stronger through diversity. Diversity can enable stronger processes of innovation, as socially diverse groups are more innovative than homogeneuses. Diverse groups are more likely for radical innovation and increased market growth. So some research that we put in our report say that diverse companies are 35% more likely to have higher financial returns. Research on the banking sector suggests that racial diversity leads to better financial performance. An increase in firm value when there is female representation in top management. And a specific study in Germany found that higher levels of research and development and innovation in regions that had higher levels of cultural diversity. Finally, there has been increasingly research on the impact of migration and innovation as host countries increase diversity demographically and culturally. So we conclude that diversity is something to be addressed if you want to engage in an open innovation model. However, and diversity is one of Canada's strengths. However, to analyze where we are and where we want to go, we must first analyze the current innovation metrics that we have. So using IP as a measurement of innovation, as Mo was suggesting, in 2016, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office said only 12% of Canadian inventors filling under the International Patent Cooperation Treaty were women. The share of women in patenting activity has been persistently lower than the share of jobs held by women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field, which means that it's not just a matter that there aren't women innovating, but rather that they are not applying for patents, which is a traditional measure for innovation. There's something, this is something that has already been addressed by ICED that has sought to address in 2019, committing to engage more women in patenting activity and IP tactics. But that's the only data that we have. There is no measurement of disaggregated racial data on patents by other related minority groups. As the report that we've been looking at says, the people in science engineering are driving the world's most vital engine of prosperity and new ideas, but who are they? Without data, we can't create accountability measures or even measures of progress. On the issues of disparity though, it's very important to highlight that there are groups of underrepresented minorities in Canada that are creating independent networks to boost each other's innovations. There's inclusion will not happen by itself, as Eunice just talked about, even in an open innovation model. Underrepresented groups will not engage in a more innovation model by default. There needs to be affirmative action and reaching out strategies to create synergy, collaboration, and inclusiveness. The issue is as much as about creating engagement of underrepresented groups in innovation sector, but also boosting those who are already innovating into federal and more complex dynamics problems. I will now pass it on to François, who will discuss how all of this comes together in our specific recommendation.
Great. Thanks, Anna. So we have data pointing to a commercialization problem in our innovation system. Although Canada is good at generating new ideas, we're not so good at translating those ideas into value-generating ventures. We also have economic data showing that Canadian provinces score relatively poorly in terms of patenting and IP management, which can play a key role in developing innovative businesses in many important industries. We know that although Canada has one of the most diverse populations in the world, minority groups are underrepresented in the IP process. So how do we address these gaps? We believe that our recommendations can help ISED take small steps towards producing better innovation outcomes by altering existing tools to be more demand-driven, more open, and more inclusive. In this way, they will be able to better respond to the rapidly changing needs of society and help convert Canada's strengths in research excellence and diversity into innovation outcomes, which can be new jobs, more exported products, higher GDP, etc. Policy window presents itself in the 2018 Intellectual Property Strategy. The strategy provides funds for new innovation tools to be developed to drive economic growth, and also has the explicit goal of bringing in underrepresented groups in the intellectual property process, such as women and Indigenous people. Specifically, it calls for the creation of an IP marketplace. And ISED responded by developing Explore IP. So what is Explore IP? It's a tool developed by ISED to help industry have visibility on publicly owned patents, which is to say patents developed by Canada's universities and other publicly funded research organizations. The idea is to help diffuse technology and to assist in the cross-pollination of ideas between industries. For example, a new aerospace material developed by the NRC could potentially have applications in other sectors, for example, house appliances. The house appliance companies can now easily find this patent and contact the patent owners to purchase a license and use their patented material in their new products. While Explore IP is still in its development phase, it's already an interesting example of a demand-driven innovation tool that helps facilitate user-producer interactions using a marketplace framework. Interestingly, the Explore IP team has already demonstrated the ability to quickly respond to societal demands. For example, it quickly responded to the COVID-19 crisis by creating a new technology category for users to search. Manufacturers are now able to browse through patents for COVID-19 solutions on Explore IP. Here we have Explore IP's current view, with the IP marketplace in the Find Patents and License tab. The platform also includes a list of public research organizations associated with the pool and a useful FAQ section in the Resources tab, which includes some links to the Canadian Intellectual Property Office's resources. Let's move on to the recommendations for the platform. This is our proposed view for the platform, and you can see that the tabs have changed slightly. We are proposing to expand the platform and to improve its performance as a technology diffuser, but also to transform it into a tool that leverages IP assets as a starting point of collaborative discussions. So our first recommendation is to make modifications on the IP marketplace framework. So first recommendation is to include privately owned patents, which we believe can broaden their user base and lead to more B2B collaboration opportunities. In the same way that Explore IP now provides visibility to publicly funded patents, it could also provide visibility for IP owners based in rural areas and for inventors who do not have well-established connections in Canada's traditional innovation centers. Providing a national platform for these inventors to sell and promote their IP could make the IP process as a whole more worthwhile for them and unlock some of Canada's latent innovation potential. The Danish Trademark and Patent Office currently hosts an IP marketplace, which includes private patents. We reached out to the office and they are interested in collaborating with ISED to evaluate the potential of this model for Explore IP. The next recommendation we have is directly related to demand-side innovation policy. We propose that Explore IP add a request function for its users, and users in collaboration ISED would be able to post their technology needs on the platform. This feature would provide insight into what the market is demanding in terms of new technologies, processes, and ideas. The concept is already being used by the World Intellectual Property Office's platform, where users can request proposals for green technology ideas. Listed patent owners, now including newly added private IP owners, could respond to these requests and directly contact the requesters in the same way that current users of Explore IP use the tool to contact the patent owners and research institutions. This could lead to more two-way flows of information and to more collaborative and commercial opportunities. In this way, government is acting as a facilitator of user-producer interactions and helping in the coordination of innovation supply and demand. The theory is that more of these discussions could lead to more transactions between actors and more diffusion of technology across industries. In our previous discussions on open innovation, we outlined how information from sources outside the government can help inform decision-making and improve innovation outcomes. By providing a way for some of the demand in the market to express itself on the platform, ISED could benefit from more visibility on technology trends and get ideas for its innovation challenges, which we'll get to in a minute. We're also recommending that ISED continue to address the significant gap between Anglophone and Francophone content on Explore IP, which now limits the potential collaboration between users of these two languages. We know that the Explore IP team is currently working with a WIPO tool that's AI enabled, that's able to translate highly technical material in batches. And so we're happy that they're working towards that goal. And this could help bridge some cognitive proximity between some of the users, which is really essential for spurring collaboration. So they're also recommending the inclusion of other types of intellectual property. Right now, the platform only promotes the sale and licensing of patents. However, other types of industrial properties, such as trademarks, could also be considered. Explore IP could also consider adding copyrights, which is an IP category that includes literature, art, architectural designs, and the like. This could help provide more opportunities for Canadian artists and for Canadian communities which depend on the creative industries for economic development. Lastly, for the marketplace framework, we also recommend adding additional analytical capabilities. So Explore IP's database search capabilities could be expanded in order to serve a more diverse user community. The Explore IP team is exploring the possibility of adding user profiles to accounts, which could capture data on users on a voluntary basis. This could help new users, such as representatives of NGOs, B Corps, and charities, use the platform to identify promising inventors and artists belong to certain underrepresented groups and reach out to them. The idea would not necessarily be to spur more sales or licensing of IP, but to use IP as an interesting starting point for discussions and collaboration. This approach would need to be paired with an effective communication strategy that would reach out to community leaders and CEOs of innovation management organizations, which we have briefly outlined in our report. We have already received positive feedback for this idea from outside stakeholders involved in social investing and innovation ecosystem management. So moving on to the next tab. So innovation challenges represent an interesting way in which the federal government can pull demand. Currently, there are many federal government departments which host innovation challenges. However, these challenges are relatively dispersed on the federal government's website pages. Include examples of the flagship Innovation Challenges program by ICED, the Impact Canada, which is run by the Privy Council, and the regional development agencies' challenges, such as the DEX Défi Propulsion. So a quick review of these challenges on these sites revealed that there's significant overlap on the themes and goals of these challenges. However, one thing that all these challenges have in common is that their outcomes could potentially lead to valuable IP assets, which could then be promoted on the Explore IP platform. Consolidating these challenges into a single space could be beneficial in and of itself, and it does not necessarily need to happen on Explore IP. However, we believe this could act in synergy with Explore IP, as it could provide some interesting opportunities for the winners of innovation challenges to promote their ideas on a national marketplace. This idea is based on Australia's Source IP platform, which was actually the basis for Explore IP. Since then, Source IP has introduced a challenges tab very similar to the one presented here, with links to third-party innovation challenge platform, an innovation map, and an expert connect service. We recommend that more services could be integrated into the platform in the following tab. So the support services tab. This tab would serve to better link existing ICED and CIPO services to the Explore IP platform. These organizations have a wide variety of tools and programs that could help users of Explore IP develop their IP commercialization strategies. For example, innovators applying for funding through ICED's Strategic Innovation Fund are required to detail their IP strategy. Including links to and from the fund's website could position Explore IP, which could now include private patent holders, as a useful tool for the winners of the fund to lead to some synergies between the two programs. Other interesting functions from the tab could include events section that could advertise upcoming events, such as the Canadian Ecosystem Gathering. And this tab also could incorporate new models of IP, such as the outcomes of the Patent Collective pilot program, which is being developed in parallel to Explore IP, and even to no patenting models currently being experimented by certain NGOs in the pharmaceutical industry. So next, I'll pass it on to my colleague Mauricio, who's going to talk about some of the risks and feasibility assessment of this proposal.
Thank you, François. Well, like in any new business, a new policy with not many precedents involves jumping into something new, as you can see in the picture. Thus, pondering which are the risks, assessing them potentially is part of what we can call a responsible audacity. In our report, we aim to identify which are these areas that would need a cautious examination to evaluate possibilities and limitations of success and also failure. In this preliminary level of analysis and presentation, we will just frame a few main questions that would need further inquiry and that can be conducted through different tools such as a sensitivity analysis or a feasibility analysis or a proof of concept. So some of the questions that we are consider worth raising are, firstly, and you can follow me in the slide on the second bullet, is to what extent we will be effectively mobilizing demand, and to what extent that demand will target specifically innovative products and services. Also, who says what's innovative? Measuring innovation is a very complex problem that, as my colleague Mo expressed earlier when referring to the indexes on innovation. So an important question is to what extent we attain also high levels of innovation, and in which areas of the economy. Are these economic areas strategic for Canada? Are we also effectively targeting market failures and social challenge? So that's a whole field of questions, we would say. Secondly, you can follow me with the third bullet. Another series of questions are about the effectiveness of the incentives we have chosen. So are we, have we identified the best levers with our research? And then are we levering them properly with the tool we're proposing, the marketplace, to have a real impact? So these questions gives place to a third level of questions. That would be the fourth bullet. This is particularly considering the intellectual property issue, patents, which is not only seen here from its legal perspective, but we're seeing it as a specific type of incentive. So is IP a good lever, among others, capable to mobilize demand for innovation? So if we go deeper in this, in analyzing IP, we can ask which are those specific aspects and features of IP that we can consider, let's say, the smartest drivers among that field. For instance, many stakeholders that some of them are present today in this presentation have pointed out that in our conversation and interviews that the lack of knowledge among entrepreneurs and innovators around IP and its legal processes is a great barrier for them. So we can ask, is information a lever? Is the lack of visibility of IPs and inventions? So funding, is funding a great barrier there? So the thing is, acknowledging there are different barriers, levers and barriers available, and that is not so easy. This is something that comes from the research and the literature. It is not so easy to isolate them in the real world and decide which levers to handle. So these are just a few emerging matters of concerns. And for last, evidence sufficiency. We raised the questions on the availability of evidence. This is kind of somewhat obvious because we're talking about new things. So the need to have evidence in showing there is strong causal relations connecting the proposed tools, the incentives, the demand for innovation of innovative products and services, and in the end, naturally, connect all these to the ultimate benefit for Canada's economy and society. So as mentioned, this is an area of risk assessment about the evidence that requires further inquiry and includes many questions. One set of questions is about the extent in which similar experiences in other countries have been evaluating. We have seen through our research that many are being compiled in documents, and it is there's an emerging discussions on how to evaluate the policies, the tools. So we think that with further evaluation of the experiences in other countries, this can be used for us, or for ICID, as proof of concept, or to draw lessons from them. And for last, another set of questions come from traditional scholarly research. In this field of inquiry, the pursuit of stronger evidence tying policy change in intellectual property with greater innovation is needed, and there is a lot of discussion in that field of correlation. So to wrap up, as you see in the guy in the picture in the slide, is the question is he going to reach the other side? Well, there's not a conclusive answer, and this is why we propose to focus on the mentioned questions to properly assess the uncertainty. So thank you, and I'll pass it on to François for the concluding remarks.
Great, thanks, Mauricio. So certainly during our research for the project, it seemed that the more we tried to answer some of these questions, the more new questions would pop up. And Mauricio raises some really good points about how do we measure success, and the causal relationships between the innovation policy efforts and the innovation outcomes that we described are not at all obvious in this field. However, we have presented research on the fundamentals of innovation dynamics, and it suggests that a demand-driven, open and inclusive approach can improve innovation outcomes and could help address Canada's commercialization gap. We have based our recommendations on this research, and we believe that the suggested tabs could work in synergy to facilitate user-producer interactions and help include a broader set of actors in our innovation system. We also want to emphasize that while Explore IP represents an interesting case study in how tools can be more demand-driven, open, and inclusive, we believe that the real value could be in applying this lens to other tools and programs within the federal government. So this concludes our presentations. We'd like to thank you all for attending, and a special thank you to the ICID team, to Natalie and our coach Samir, and to all the experts who have helped us along the way. We are now open to questions.
Thank you, François. Thank you, team. We are now going to open for the Q&A period. The way that we're going to proceed is we're going to start with the team's coach, Dr. Samir Faraj, who has been accompanying them for the last 6 months to ask a question. I would ask you to turn on your mics and your video, and then we'll be proceeding with the ICID team. And I sense that there's quite a few members of the ICID team present online, and so we want to make sure we have plenty of time to allow you the opportunity to ask the team some questions, but also for the team to answer. So if we can keep the questions brief and succinct, and team, if we can keep the answers brief and succinct while still being complete, that would be great. So Samir, are you on the line with us?
I am, but you have to allow me, you have to start my video.
Okay. Well, go ahead and ask your question, and oh, here we go. I've just found the button. Takes me some time.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Perfect.
Good afternoon, team. Great job in the presentation. It has been a long journey for the team, and I'm very proud of the way in which they started with a very open-ended problem or set of questions, and were able to cohere it into a set of principles and then into a more specific set of recommendations. So I'll be quick. So you have, to your credit, you have talked about demand-driven approaches, an idea of openness, inclusiveness, and to your credit, these are important issues. And you talked about going from innovative organizations to innovation ecosystems and so on. And you basically have chosen to beef up and build on an existing platform and make it more inclusive and more functional and effective for innovation. The question I have derives from the current news environment. And I apologize if there's noise on the line. There's construction in the building across the street. But if you can still hear me, my question is, the current governmental policy in Canada is to with regard to innovation has been to invest significant money into regional superclusters. They have basically set up one on AI in Quebec or Montreal, one on manufacturing in Ontario or Toronto. And a lot of money has been invested, and these tend to take advantage of regional strengths, which are that much of the innovation happens idiosyncratically, people meet accidentally, new ideas emerge from this abrasion between people, it's bottom up, and it's very inclusive to public-private partnerships. Your solution tends to be, takes the strength of platforms and the advantages of having large Canada-wide kind of ecosystem where things can be controlled, managed, more specific. So my question to you is, given the current budget climate in Canada and the budget hole we're looking at, which would you prioritize between these two kind of set of priorities, given your goals?
Maybe I can take this one. So I think that the question is between our approach and the supercluster initiative. How would you weigh? I actually think that our approach could be complementary to a supercluster initiative in the sense that one of our main goals is to cross-pollination of ideas between different industries. So to give one example, the supercluster Scale AI happening in Montreal could lead to some really interesting applications in the blue tech sector. For Canada's ocean supercluster, I'm thinking of just-on-time delivery, AI-enabled just-on-time delivery for shipping and for supply chains. So I think that building tools for companies within the clusters or for organizations within the clusters to share their ideas, share their IP, would actually work with or would actually kind of support that one. So I don't know if I would say that there's necessarily a dichotomy or a need to prioritize one over the other.
Thank you, François. We are now going to, thank you, Samir, as well. We're going to move over to the ISED team. If you have a question, and if you can turn your mic and your video on, there we have Mark. We'll go first in, first out. So Mark, why don't you start with your question? And if anybody else from the ISED team has a question, please just turn your mic and your video on, and we'll get to you after Mark.
Thanks ever so much, and a huge congratulations to the team. So I'm Mark Shawn. I'm the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategy and Innovation Policy Sector. And it was in my old job as the Director General for Marketplace Framework Policy Branch that I was responsible for Canada's IP strategy and Explore IP. So obviously hugely gratifying to see folks innovating and working off of what was a very significant and solid effort from the team to get Explore IP up and running, as well as the broader IP strategy. I guess I'd be really interested in your thoughts, around kind of broader barriers to intellectual property utilization. So I love this idea of kind of democratizing the platform, maximizing its utilization, really kind of pushing it to its full potential. Innovation challenges, broader sets of IP. We'd always hoped to explore, to expand it beyond to copyrights and trademarks and other things. But, one of the fundamental kind of premises of the IP strategy was, IP is expensive, IP is really tricky. Even if I go on Explore IP, the next step for me probably is a licensing agreement. It probably is some sort of working with that patented technology in certain uses, but not others. And I'm probably going to need lawyers. I'm probably going to need some sort of mechanism to be able to do that. So, the goals of democratizing its usage and diversifying its usage are extraordinarily important to us. But wonder if you have any thoughts about how to lower the price of admission to the usage of the tool, and to democratize it even more so maybe in terms of knowledge and understanding.
So I kind of specialized on the tool itself. If the rest of the team's okay, if they'll probably take this one too. So we definitely agree with a lot of the things you just mentioned, as the IP process and the process of licensing and acquiring patents can be heavy and not very well understood by a lot of people, members. But in our discussions with the Explore IP management team, there was an agreement that it could be, we could look beyond using Explore IP as simply for transactions, which can be difficult. and licensing opportunities as you described, and more thinking of expanding the uses of IP assets as a really interesting starting point for discussions, not necessarily related to IP, but perhaps for employment. So you could browse for talent using IP as kind of, for users to use their IP as kind of as a marketing tool for themselves, so that they could find new opportunities within companies. So kind of moving the discussion past, the strictly commercial aspect of the IP, and then you can kind of see yourself as building a portfolio of IP assets that kind of showcases your skills as an inventor and all of the tools that you have. And so the emphasis on really not just using IP in its strictly technical language specifically, but adding kind of a layer that talks about the business applications of your idea and showing that you're kind of entrepreneurial minded like that. That also helps not only in the transactions and making them more easier for people to imagine the uses of your IP, but also in terms of, talking up your chops in terms of entrepreneurial and stuff, and entrepreneurialism and things like that. So that's kind of the direction we're thinking in terms of changing the way that platforms use.
Thank you, Mark, for your question. Thank you, François, for the answer. Before we move on to the faculty, I just want to do another shout out to anybody at ISED from industry that would like to ask the team a question. Please do not hesitate. Just either raise your hand, mention something to me in the chat, or just turn on your mic and your video, and we will try and answer your question. Okay, Chris, it's going to be your turn now, so it's time for you to turn your video on and ask apparently your big question.
Thank you very much, team. That was a very interesting presentation. So I want to ask a question as a skeptic, and I don't want to be skeptical of your recommendations. I find myself kind of being skeptical about the role of government in innovation. So we're not talking here about helping along basic research. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, should we somehow help in some way, demand side, supply side, Ford come up with a better electric vehicle? Or should we help Bombardier come up with a more efficient jet engine? Or should we help Gillette come up with a better razor? Now, as long as we've got IP, as long as we've got patents that provide genuine protection for intellectual property, my question, I guess, is why do we need to do anything in this space? And in fact, there was a book that came out about 10 years ago called The Power of Productivity that looked at a whole bunch of industries, a whole bunch of countries, and it found that the most innovative sectors and the most productive sectors were the ones that were subject to the most competition. So why don't we, so here's my idea, why don't we use policies to increase competition in sectors, make the airline sector more competitive, make telecoms more competitive, make financial services more competitive, and that greater competition will drive innovation. So that's my skeptical idea. What do you think of that?
I can take this one.
Yes.
I think it's important to remember that we are mostly talking on public investment on innovation. So I do agree that the most efficient way to create innovation from the private sector is in the way we are seeing it, and maybe just fostering the competitiveness levels that we have. But when the governments are investing in innovation policies, we also should look forward to see public value and how they can actually create public value. Let's say that we are investing in the creation of a vaccine. We want also not only the vaccine itself, we want also to make sure that it's going to be accessible and affordable for everybody, because the value of that innovation goes beyond the value in the market. And that's the public value we need to create with these new policies. Is that? Yeah.
Well, so you're really talking about developing products that have a public good aspect, but lots of products, presumably, that we're talking about in this space are private goods, right? The jet engine isn't a public good. The jet engine is a private good.
I see Chris is discriminating across industries. Thank you, Chris, for your question, and Eunice for your answer. I would like to pass the mic over to Heather from ISED.
Hi, everyone. I've just come back recently to the team. I was off on mat leave for a year, so I haven't been involved in this project, but as the director of intellectual property and the responsible for the Explore IP platform, I just wanted to say thank you and congratulations. So thank you for taking all of your time and effort and energy and enthusiasm digging into this project and coming up with these great recommendations and spending so much time on this. We really appreciate it. You've done a fantastic job, and I just wanted to give you all the kudos from the team. I know you worked a lot with Frederic and Petra, so just wanted to say thank you and congratulations. You guys did a really good job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. We are going to move on to another question we have from Taylor Owen. Taylor, I hope the sound works this time.
Yeah, I'm still on my sketchy internet from this morning, so this may not work. But
if you turn the video
thanks, guys.
off,
that was a great
the sound might be
presentation.
better.
All right, hope you can hear me. So great presentation, and I wanted to step back a little bit from the details of the proposal and look at how you saw the digital policymaking space a bit more generally. I mean, often what we find, both I think in the patent space, but in others, is that new innovation policies or new strategies for policymaking in the digital space bump up against legacy ones. So they're not additive, they're actually in tension. And I think that's the case in the patent sphere, or I would imagine it might be. Did you find cases where sort of industrial innovation policies, for example, domestically, bumped up against the needs of policies to support patents, and internationally, maybe around trade agreement negotiations, where certain industries were being prioritized over the interests of IP developers?
Yeah, okay. So I can't really think of anything specific that we saw. I think your question is related to which way does new IP policy kind of disrupt existing policies or disrupt certain industries within Canada. I think that's what I understood. And quickly, you mentioned the issue of IP and trade agreements, which is a really big issue. So in discussions with Explore IP team, one of the things we didn't explore in our presentation, but it's whether tools that increase visibility like that, that could be the perspective that, or the question could be asked of how much are you helping Canadian businesses develop their IP versus giving visibility on the Canadian ideas to other countries, and how much is IP being developed in Canada versus being utilized in other countries. I think those are really interesting debates as Canada moves towards more of a knowledge ecosystem. The importance of maybe not retaining ideas within Canada, but certainly making sure that those ideas are developed in Canada as much as possible if we're trying to get objectives like job creation. I think those are kind of the latest cutting edge issues that people I said and then the experts are struggling with. So I don't know if that answers your question, but thank you for asking it.
Thank you, François. Thank you, Taylor. We have one last question from Ian Peach, who heard Chris's question. I think he has a comment and another question on top of it. So I think Chris might have struck a nerve or at least triggered an idea. Ian, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. Chris sort of made something gel in my brain that I think the team is really onto something because Chris asked the critical question, so what should government do anyway? And my experience in government is that government is notoriously risk averse. So getting government to support innovation is nigh unto impossible because they put so many strictures around it that it no longer becomes innovative. But what I heard from your design, from the team, might be something really important. Government as broker. Because I think Chris is right that the most innovation happens, I would say, only in part where there's the greatest competition, but also where there is the greatest opportunity for collaboration. And our market failure in the innovation market may well be, I'm just speculating here, but it may well be an information failure. That folks don't know one another and don't know who does what and how they can actually collaborate effectively. Am I right that what you're designing, proposing, is essentially to use a silly old term, an information superhighway for innovators? That government's role in this enterprise will be as broker? That's sort of the impression I get of the team's proposal, and I think that would be way cool.
IP service. It's Tinder for IP.
Yeah, that's right. Am I right? Is that what you're proposing to us?
Pick on that. Can I pick that question? So actually, demand side policies have basically if we have to divide them in two categories. Some are very economically driven, like a tax rebate that drives people to purchase innovative goods just because government is making them cheaper, right? There are other economic tools, but the other set of tools are mainly symbolic and are related to communication and are related to information. So the answer is yes. So if we have to kind of make like a big division of demand side policies, we would say there are some that are economically driven, some that are symbolically, I would label. And the question of Chris is so interesting because among the field of the symbolic things or that we can include knowledge, information, there are so many experiences, very interesting, showing how a combination of tools that we include, let's say, standards, labeling, certifications, like when you go to a store and you have, two different labels and you can't compare them effectively. So to some extent, and this is response to Jan, but also to Chris, if the public, both end users and firms, are better informed about the features and specifically can look at the innovative features, they can make a smarter decision. So from my or our understanding, with certification standards, information, and other tools in this field, companies can better compete with an informed public.
Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you, Ian, for that special moment and for Mark's comment in the chat as a result. I see Petra has opened up her video and her sound. So Petra, why don't you give us the final question for the session as we close this up?
I actually have a bit of more of a reaction and a comment to add on what has been said so far. And I just want to say that the term that Explore IP actually was referred to in the past as the Tinder for innovators and companies. And I believe that is so important and a memorable message that can be remembered easily. I'm not saying we should use this in our communications, but we definitely should have very good and proactive communications and outreach, which we're trying to do now, even in a revised way in the pandemic. But I was going to also say that Explore IP in the future, it's actually, the plan is to become a little bit more, even than it is now, the matchmaking platform for innovators and companies. So whether it's by adding other types of IP, adding another layer of having the researchers and their expertise on the platform and connecting that to the organizations that we host on the platform, opening up to private sector. It's all kind of leading to becoming that, that matchmaking innovation platform, hopefully, and a highway. So this is just a comment on that we are very much aligned in the Explore IP team with this vision. And I also want to thank the team for all of their incredible work. And it's been really a pleasure to be part of this. So thank you.